Hi, everyone, and thanks for coming. I'm Gabriel Riccio. You may know me as the guy who makes the King Crimson sheet music books with Trey Gunn, or for my project, the Gabriel Construct. I recently began interviewing some of my musical collaborators here on Make Weird Music, and this is the third of those interviews. Today, I'm here with Jeff Libersher, the guitarist, composer, and sometimes vocalist and trumpeter of Chicago weirdo legends Cheer Accident, a band that has been terrorizing people's ears since the 80s. They've been consistently characterized by their unpredictability, doing things like setting up in a park and playing a one-bar dissonant riff for 6 hours straight, or arriving at a gig with nothing but keyboards and sunglasses for a surprise lounge set. Their lineup is a constantly shifting collective, but Jeff is one of the band's two consistent members, the other being drummer, singer, pianist, trumpeter, composer Tim Jones. To give some quick background on my own association with the band, I saw Cheer Accident for the very first time on the same afternoon and the same stage that I saw the Mercury Tree for the first time, which was at the Chicago Progtoberfest in 2014, the first one of those. Became an immediate fan. Just the particular brand of quirky joy they were exuding on stage instantly won me over. At the time, the lineup included vocalist, keyboardist Evelyn Davis and bassist Dante Kester. I can't remember if I'd already connected with Dante through Shane Prendeville from Guzzlemug and Murmur, who was also playing with me at the time, as I discussed in the interview with Sasha Mullen, or if I met Dante at that show, but either way, I was really won over by Dante's playing, and he soon ended up joining my live band for a year. Thanks to Dante, I ended up playing 2 Chicago gigs as part of Cheer Accident's live band, one in 2015 at Martyrs, and another in 2016 in Tim's basement, playing auxiliary keyboards. And I believe it was during the rehearsals for those shows that I really got to know Jeff, who I feel very privileged to know. So thank you for joining me here today, Jeff. It's really cool to have you here, especially since you never really do interviews on your own, right?
No, I don't. Thanks for the invite. Thanks for thinking of me. And yes, I rarely have done anything like or do things like this for an assortment of reasons. One, I'm not super comfortable in any sort of role where I'm talking about myself, that sort of a thing. But in, I guess, the spirit of the recent eclipse, I'll put aside my usual host of excuses, and I'm here for you, hoping I can pass the audition.
Well, thank you so much for that, Jeff.
Sure.
The song we heard at the start of the interview was your track, They Won't Talk to Me, which was released through the band subscription service in 2022, I believe. I think it really highlights the range that this band is capable of in a single track. It really takes you on a journey. So do you want to tell us a little bit about that song?
Um, yeah, boy, it is a journey. There's a lot going on. I'd almost have to back up and talk about, I guess, the writing process to get really inside of it. But it's just something that, took a lot of hard work. I got to the point where I had all these parts and sections that I liked, and I was able to marry certain things together and presented it to Tim to see what he thought of it, and he dug it, and he added a lot to what was sort of the base song, if you will. And then we got some other monster folks to come in and do their parts on it. The trombone part that I wrote for Mike is probably next to impossible, but he still did it. So and yeah, I think it turned out better than I would have expected. I'm pretty happy with how that one turned out.
Awesome. That's a more recent example of your work with the band, but you've been recording with this band since 1987, is that right?
Yeah, it sounds right. Yeah.
So what has this band meant to you, and how has it affected your life?
Wow. Well, first, I actually do remember meeting you at Progtoberfest um, that night. Interestingly enough, my brain is not the kind of brain that remembers specific dates very well. So had you said to me, we met in at Progtoberfest in 2013 or 2015, I would have been like, yeah, that sounds right. But I do remember Dante was sitting near you in those tables up front. And I sat down next to Dante, and he introduced me to you. And among the sort of like crazy aggro blasting music that was going on, I attempted to have a conversation with you, but I just remember getting a really good vibe, and I'm like, oh, this guy's really sweet and brilliant. I want to get to know that guy. So I believe we did meet there that first time, and I'm glad you got to experience quirky joy. I think that's how you put that. So, anyways, I think you just asked what the band has meant to me, correct?
Yeah, yeah. And thanks for setting me straight on that because the chronology was pretty
I,
foggy in my head. So
I may be wrong, but I do remember meeting you. Oh,
cool.
So, but oh my gosh, what the band has meant to me, I almost, how much time do we have?
Plenty.
Okay, well, I kind of have to back up a bit and maybe talk about what music has meant to me,
Sweet.
and then sort of parlay that into what the band has meant to me. Um, I guess, uh, first of all, music is always kind of has been and is probably more so now than ever, like probably top of the list for me as to reasons to want to get up in the morning. And I guess my first, I think that's like I said, true probably now than ever. Um, I mean, as a kid, I think my first sort of real exposure to what music would mean to me was when I was like 6 maybe or something. My brother had this little light blue, I remember, with one of the antennas on it, a transistor radio, and it got in the AM stations. And at the time, when I was that age, WLS and I want to say WCFL were the Chicago stations, and they played top 40 rock pop music. And I would sit in my bedroom with that thing and I would just listen to those stations over and over and over while I sat and I had some colored pencils and I would sit up there in my room and draw pictures of monsters or buildings or the neighbor woman torturing the children in the neighborhood, um, and listen to this music nonstop. So I had a friend who lived next door who was maybe a year older than me, and he had a similar fondness for the top 40 stations at the time. So we decided we should form a band. And so neither of our families had much money. So what that entailed was we went into his father's garage and we just sort of poked through a lot of the junk in there and we constructed a drum set for him out of like his father, like a bushel basket was his bass drum. And I remember there was this black label beer crate that we used for like his toms and some pails we
Awesome.
turned upside down for the snare. And then he had this tiny little faded yellow toy guitar, like a child's toy, but it had these strings on it, a couple that just went plunk. And so we duct taped that around my neck, and we would open the garage door up and perform to the creeper neighbors that would stop by or whatever. And I remember we always did Windy by the Association. That was like one of my favorite songs, and he liked the Archies, which so we would do Sugar Sugar, and even then I knew that was bad, but he was my buddy. I had his back, so had to take one for the team. And we also did Snoopy versus the Red Baron by the Royal Guardsmen, which turned out to be the first 45 I ever bought with my paper route money. Um, so flash forward a bit, I eventually found myself a couple of my friends from baseball, fourth, fifth grade, whenever that was, where the band director comes around, or at least they did then, and they try to talk you into joining band, learning an instrument. They were interested, so I became interested. And I thought, oh, that'd be cool. So I still had to kind of fly it up the flagpole and ask my parents. Um, so I knew my mom would be the easier of the two choices there. So I went to her first. And I remember her her response was, "Oh, that sounds okay, son, but you got to be careful you don't catch some horrible disease from that horn you're going to be blowing." So she was always about lockjaw, like I was going to get lockjaw from touching anything. So, but we got past that, and she was able to ask my dad, and after he ranted about the cost, he eventually said yes. So I started taking lessons and private lessons, and I think the first guy, his name was Mr. Wright, which is pretty ironic because he was horribly. I remember he smelled like a fucking alley, and he drank throughout the whole lesson. He would pour himself like whiskey into this paper cup and just scream at me. Um, but after about a month or two of Mr. Right, my dad came in my room, I remember one day, and he just kind of tossed this beat up old con trumpet on the bed and said, "Here." And like a week later, I started taking lessons from his cousin, this Billy Joe guy, who was actually a bigger drunk and even yelled even more than the first guy. He used to actually jam the mouthpiece into my teeth, I remember, and scream about my Libersher, which I had no idea what that meant. It's just some word I didn't understand. So, um, and he would come on Saturdays, and I remember like the lessons were like noon, and he'd come up and just sit downstairs for a while and drink with my dad. Sometimes he'd get up there by 1 or 2 or 3. Sometimes we wouldn't even have a lesson. But I found out later the reason I started seeing him was because he owed my dad a bundle of money from one of my dad's late night poker fiascos. And so to sort of make things square with him, he offered up his shitty old trumpet and so like 6 months of free lessons for me. Um, I'll say luckily for me, he got in a pretty bad car accident like shortly after that. And so I had no more Billy Joe, luckily. Um, so anyways, I was still listening to music. And the reason I'm talking about some of this stuff is just to sort of paint a background for the role music played for me, because you sort of asked, what it's meant to me, or at least what the band has. And I had to kind of start out here. So then I got some other teachers that were less abusive, let's say. And then I had a friend named Bruce who, by the time I got to high school, he recommended I take lessons from his teacher, who was a man named Peter Labella, who I ended up doing that. And was the sweetest, kindest man I've ever known in my life. And he actually saved my life. That's a whole separate story. But prior to that, I was exposed to obviously classical stuff from band in junior high school and whatnot. So I was getting that. I was still listening to the top 40 stuff. I loved all of it. And around maybe seventh grade-ish or whatever, there was one of the neighborhood kid diddlers, this dude that was like the pot dealer too. He was maybe 4 years older than me. He kept trying to talk my buddy Arthur and I into like going and hanging out in his room. And he literally used the guise of, "I have candy for you." But like we had been through enough shit by then, and we had each other's back, and we are just like, this kid's 100 pounds wringing wet. Let's just go see what's up. So uh, nothing happened nefarious wise or anything, but one thing he did was expose me to like rock music. So like the first thing he played, I remember, was Black Sabbath's first record. And I was like, whoa, what is this? And so he exposed me to a lot of rock music. Around that time, FM radio had sort of turned into a thing in Chicago. So they were playing like album-oriented rock. And that's where I kind of got like my taste of prog music, if you will. They would play like an entire Yes record. And so I got kind of into like ELP, Yes, early Genesis, stuff like that. Now in band and with this new teacher, I started practicing like 4 hours a night, and I got good on trumpet, obviously. And my buddy Bruce was just as good. And these upperclassmen were like basically athletes when it came to playing trumpet. They were all into all the squealers and the guys at the time like Maynard Ferguson and Bill Chase. And of course, I became enamored with that, but I was also turned on to a lot of other stuff, good fusion, good jazz. And yeah, like so I just kept expanding my palette. But at that point, I never in a million years imagined myself ever playing music other than what I was doing in school. Around the same time, high school, picked up an old guitar my brother had, and I found out I could play, I could play songs by ear. I could pick out chords and whatnot. So went off to college, brought the guitar with me, but I probably think I upgraded to like $100 electric guitar. I had my little amp, and I was still picking out music, playing by ear. And that's when I met Tim. And he left school. We stayed in touch. I graduated, um, went to live with him, and I can get into the whole compositional thing maybe later. But I found joy in playing with him at that point, uh, trying to make something new. And that's not something I ever envisioned could happen or would ever happen for me. And so, just sort of flashing forward as to all the years of being in the band, that feeling of joy and purpose and I feel genuine when I'm playing music or writing music or being a part of something like that. And the reason I painted the other background is because it gave me that, whereas that other existence did not. So I can't really put into words how much it's meant to me and how much it does mean, but it's had a huge impact on me. And I'm sorry that was so long-winded. But
Oh no, nothing to apologize for. And thank you for going into such detail there. So
yeah.
it sounds like just music has kind of been an anchor amongst a lot of really tough stuff for you then.
Yeah, yeah, and I truly appreciate it. I mean, it was a game changer for me, and is.
I'm really glad you found it and that you have it.
Me too, buddy.
So let's go back to the early 90s, um,
Uh-oh.
particularly the Dumbass record that
Hmm?
you recorded with Steve Albini, rest in peace.
Oh,
Um,
you're
so
gonna
that was
make me cry again, buddy.
sorry, won't go there yet.
It's okay. Oh, yeah. Uh-oh. Get ready. Okay, go ahead. Sorry.
Uh, um, so that was a trio record, right? And each of you contributed to the writing of it in a
Hmm.
big way. And I hear a lot of influence from King Crimson's Red in the guitar parts, which I'm guessing was very much your doing.
Uh, yeah, I can hear that too. I think if you're talking specifically about the guitar parts, I certainly had a hand in that bucket. I kind of came to King Crimson a little later in the game as far as like prog bands, if you will. Like as I mentioned earlier, I was hearing stuff like yes, ELP, Jethro Tull, Pink Floyd, things like that when I was younger. And for whatever reason, a lot of the prog bands that I probably liked the best, I got to a little bit later in life. There's kind of a funny story, and I will get back to your question and answer it. But it just made me think of this. Like one of those bands being Gentle Giant. I remember, and this I think was actually after college when I was maybe living with Tim. He was talking about Gentle Giant and how great they were, and I was like, really? And he's like, you don't like them? And I was like, I don't know. I bought a record by them once in high school and I brought it home. I was so excited because the record store I bought it from, they used to put these blurbs out where the guys would write these amazing descriptions. And I was like, wow, this sounds incredible. And I was so underwhelmed. And I even listened to it again and it sounded worse a second time. And so I just wrote that band off. And then when I said that to Tim, he's like, "Oh, what album did you buy?" And I told him Giant for a Day. He's like, "Oh." So it's kind of well known, I guess, that that's not their best effort. I think they were trying to be a pop band then or whatever. But he turned me on to their earlier stuff, and my head was blown off. In fact, Ray is probably one of my favorite bassists on the planet that ever lived. But anyways, back to the Crimson thing, I kind of came to them late also, not for a similar reason. I just didn't dive in. I remember when I first heard Lark's Tongues, I think it was at a party or something in college. I was just like, whoa, that's sinister. I feel like I just got disemboweled by that guitar. And so I jumped in and, I became pretty obsessed. So I didn't set out during Dumbass era to write something that sounded like King Crimson. I think just the more you are informed, the more you listen and love a band, I think you're informed by what they do, maybe sound wise. And I think that's all that happened is that that was in the ether, so to speak. So, yep.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense because that record doesn't sound like a tribute to the 70s, right? I mean, it sounds modern for the 90s very much, and it's got that noise rock element going on, and it's just
Mhm.
something that in the construction of the parts where I really hear that. So I think that makes a lot of sense. I think you really kind of took that and made it your own thing. And one song on that record where I hear that influence is Fat Dog's Gonna Hatch. And that's a song that you play, at least in part, live relatively frequently. And you played it at the 2022 C Prog show. And there will actually be a video of that set going up on Make Weird Music, released on this channel at a later date.
Cool.
So I want to give everyone a little sneak preview of that show. So here is a little bit of Fat Dog's Gonna Hatch. Wow.
We're back.
So, one thing I love about you guys is how there are some really just serious grooves in there too.
Mhm.
There's odd time stuff going on, and there's improvisatory stuff going on, and then it'll come back to just this undeniable groove. And but another thing that um, you see in this video is your live shows are very unconventional, right? Because you love playing medleys, and this is a great example of that, right? In
Mhm.
that video, you were playing Learn to Fly, or rather, I guess you started with part of Fat Dog's Gonna Hatch, then you went directly into Learn to Fly, and then you played another chunk of Fat Dog's Gonna Hatch, and then you threw in a little bit of People Are Props from Baby Shouldn't Smoke,
Yeah.
just very briefly, and then you jump into part of Even Has a Half Life from
Mhm.
Not a Food at the end there. So where does that come from? That kind of medley approach to live shows? Because you don't see a lot of bands doing that.
Yeah, I think it's a unique approach. Tim has kind of, I think, steered that ship over the years. He creates our set lists for the most part, and he's really good at putting those sort of transitional ideas together to where they will have the most impact and effect. And sorry, I'm already losing my voice. Can you tell I don't do this much? So yeah, I think I personally love the approach. I think it's great. I think it's um, I don't know, there you mentioned joy earlier. I think there's an aspect of that in approaching something like that. And it's not just giving a nod to like, I mean, I remember seeing Genesis, you know, in the later years and Phil Collins saying we're going to do some new songs and some old songs, and the old songs were just like kind of strung together in a medley that they seemed like they were just going through the motions. And this is to me the opposite of that. So I enjoy doing it. Um, so
Yeah, I think it really succeeds as a way to kind of keep the material fresh and get a new
mhm.
angle on it by just recontextualizing it, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Um, so most of what we heard in that video was Fat Dog's Gonna Hatch and a little bit of Even Has a Half Life at the end. And these are both songs that you co wrote. And you strike me as a real team player, you know? So it's really not surprising to me that most of your writing early on was collaborative with the other members. But as time went on, you started coming into your own. And in 1997, you released the first Cheer Accident songs that you mostly wrote by yourself. King Cheeseman on Not a Food and Frozen on Enduring the American Dream. And then I think the first song credited solely to you was Simple Life on What Sequel from 2006. So can you talk a little about that gradual transition you made from collaborator to songwriter?
Well, first, thanks for calling King Cheeseman a song. Um, I appreciate that. Uh, wow, this may be a bit long too to do it justice, but I'll try to see what I can do here. Yeah, like when I first started playing with Tim, um, we I met him at college. He went off and was in bands, and one of them being dot dot dot. And then I ended up living with him in this creepy house in Streamwood, Illinois, where by then I had upgraded my amp slightly and my guitar slightly to the point where I was able to sit in the living room with him and play. And he was very encouraging about coming up with stuff like in the moment, jamming, whatever you want to call it. And as I had mentioned earlier, I was mostly just like playing other people's music till then. It's like, oh yeah, I can learn these riffs and these chords from whatever dumb rock song was listening to at the moment. But this was a whole new thing for me. So we started playing together, and as I said, he was very encouraging, and to me that was like a drug because I didn't get a ton of that. And um, that sort of morphed into a place where, if I remember this right, like I said, memory, me, details. Um, but he suggested because the guitarist for dot 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 had left the band, Scott Ashley, who's just a sick, ridiculous guitar player and has played on some of our stuff before. Also, um, urban legend is that he went out to get cigarettes and never came back at a rehearsal. I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a funny story. So Tim sort of suggested, oh, let's see if this can still work with Jeff playing the guitar role. So Jeff Beck was a drummer for dot dot dot, and Chris Block, bassist, and Tim and I started sort of trying to work some stuff up in Streamwood House, and we were doing a couple of things, but I felt very intimidated. I was with these three monster musicians, and I was yeah, this is all new to me. So I don't remember how long it went for, but at a certain point, I think Jeff kind of just got like a little disillusioned with what I wasn't or was bringing to the table. I don't know if that's what happened or not fully, but it's sort of, I think he just was no longer interested. And but in the meantime, Tim thought there was something there, so he continued playing with me and asked Chris to continue playing. And so I think that's about when maybe he had the idea of if we could turn this into something, it could be this Cheer Accident thing that he had already started on his own, but as like maybe a live band. And that's how it started. And it would literally, because of, as I mentioned, encouragement, doing this thing, I would sort of spit out a weird angular uh, riff once in a while, and they'd be like, "Oh, that's cool, do that again," and then they would create a song around a riff or what have you, and that's so it was very collaborative at that point. In fact, on the first record that we did, Sever Roots, I think I may be wrong, but I think Fat Dog, or I mean, excuse me, Death in Texas was probably the first thing, and I had that riff, and we built up around that. Avoid the Invisible, similar kind of thing. I had this like guitar chord linear structure thing, but they were literally just parts. They were just like a guitar part. And I had no idea how to like write a bass part, think about a drum part, think about anything, let alone a melody. So that's how it kind of started. And these guys turned those things into songs back then. So same thing with the next record, Dumbass. Like there were, some of the stuff was originated by like riffs I may have had and whatnot, but same thing. Band built up the songs around that sort of thing. And what happened was really the third, or when we did Babies, Phil had joined the band. Chris like really hit his stride. Like I said, by then those guys were already prolific songwriters to me. And I, at that point, still had no concept that I could ever write a song by myself. I was joyful that I was doing this thing with these friends and we were making music. And to me, that was incredible. It's something I would have never envisioned for myself. Um, but as I said, when Babies came along, uh, Chris came in with these like written out songs and these mind-blowing guitar parts that were like going against each other but complementing each other, and one was going to be my part, one was going to be Phil's, and we would learn them. And even more so, he had all these weird tunings, and I was just like, what? That kind of blew my mind. It's like, oh, I mean, you can tune this thing in a different way other than what you're supposed to. And that really planted a seed for me going forward. I didn't realize at the time, but uh, so a lot of Babies was stuff that, I didn't have a ton to do on that other than playing the guitar parts. But by the time we got towards Not a Food, I had purchased a Tascam like cassette 4-track because I had the idea, oh, maybe I can write some other parts. And I started doing it. I started my writing process has always kind of been like I almost like I'm on some subconscious level where I will just sort of like spit out a riff without hearing it or thinking about it. And then I'll have to record that and then I'll listen back with my conscious mind and be like, "Oh, that's kind of cool," or that needs to be tweaked. But then I'll start to gradually around that period, I started hearing other guitar parts in my head and other things. And little by little, more and more of that came along. So by the time King Cheeseman came along, I had written this initial guitar part chords and recorded that. And then I added the other stuff. I had these other guitar parts. And then I had this idea for a dumb bass part in mind. It sounded like this carnival thing. Where dum, 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 dum. And then the well, we'll call it vocals. That was just like pure id vomit riffing on like yet another childhood experience, which real quick story, I guess, why not, right? One of the ruffians from the neighborhood was this girl. I'm not going to name her because if she's still on the planet, she might find me and kill me. So I'm still afraid of her. But she used to call me King Cheeseman. And it was, as she said, you have too many moles and cheesy skin. And it's kind of true if you can see. I still have a lot of moles and I'm at the dermatologist a lot. But anyways, so she used to do this thing called the Cheeseman Surprise, where she would wait for me where I'd be walking between houses or whatever. And then she would just blindside me, knock me to the ground, sit on my chest, and start spitting in my mouth and my face and like whacking on me, and like, well, the others held me down. And I usually wiggled away without absorbing too many blows. So those vocals were just me sort of ruminating on that experience. And I just thought that sort of fit the tone of that song. So that's how the first song kind of came about, if you will. By the time Frozen came along, I had started doing more and more of that, and I had upgraded my recording device to a digital 8-track thing by then, so I could have more tracks. And that came about the same way. The initial thing was just the first guitar part, started hearing things, and by then I was starting to hear a melody. And actually wrote a vocal melody for the first time that I thought was pretty cool and good. And so most of that song is mine. Tim did that middle section that's complete mental illness, and I had to actually play that on a 12-string guitar, and somehow Mike played that, I think, on trombone. But so I mean, long story short, that's just continued, and it's literally, in my opinion, there's no magic button. It's just hard work, and like most things, the more you do something, whether it's good or bad for you, you're going to probably get better at it. And so the more I did this, the more I heard things, the more I was able to, I just became more prolific at it, and it kind of fed on itself because it's something I found I really enjoyed. It gave me a purpose, and as you get better at it and do it more, and it's just circular at a certain point, and you get better at self-editing eventually. Although Tim might take question with that. Jeff, do we really need these 27 guitar tracks? Actually, usually, yeah, but that's a whole nother story. He's actually really good at sort of editing me, but I've learned to get better at self-editing too. I'm just saying, I think I'm better at writing now than I even was 5 years ago, and I'm being objective, and it's literally just rolling up your sleeves and doing the work. So having said that, one more thing I want to add, I still actually prefer the collaborative approach. No matter what formation of the band or what time period, the stuff I always enjoyed the most was working up stuff together with the other members. I know that Tim is kind of our archivist, and he and Alex and I have tons of stuff that we had sort of like started and worked up, and then like a show would come up or a tour, and we'd have to stop working on it. But we're always trying to pull that stuff back out so we can kind of finish it. And I don't want to lose that part either. So, okay, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a really incredible arc to go from just sort of really basic writing one guitar part at a time to writing these incredibly complex pieces. And that's one of the things which really struck me about playing with you guys was how incredible that your compositions are. Because I think the first song that I learned for the show that I did with you guys was Sun Dies, which is the opening track from Fear Draws Misfortune from 2009.
Mhm.
And that's one of your compositions with lyrics by Scott Rutledge. And that track opens with this incredibly complex polymeter. Right? It starts with two guitars, and I haven't really sat down and analyzed this thoroughly, but if I'm remembering correctly, one's playing in 7, the other's playing in 9, then a third guitar enters in a third time signature. The bass comes in rhythmic unison with the guitar in 7, and the drums play a half-speed 7 underneath that, and then there's this double trumpet melody on top of it that's really crunchy, and these choral vocals, and it's all on the whole tone scale. And I mean, it's just that's a really incredible arc to start from where you started with this and getting to that. And that song really blew my mind. And I'm just gonna play a little snippet of it so people can hear what I'm talking about before we get into the weeds with that.
to this world so wide. He steals what he can't give. When he sees the others shine, he goes blind. When he hears them start to cry, he feels like he has lived, 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 lived,
Wow.
My
That was
favorite part about that is as if there wasn't enough going on, then Tim created this like drum part that sounds like someone's starting up a fucking snowblower. It's like, wait, how does that fit against these other things? It's amazing, actually. So yeah, thanks for playing part of that. Haven't heard it in a long time, so.
yeah, and that's, basically just a hair over a decade after you started writing songs by yourself, right? I mean, that's just an incredible evolution.
Sounds about right. Yeah, I appreciate that. Um,
So then, things like really took off for you as a songwriter and composer in 2011 with the No Ifs, Ands, or Dogs record, which has several songs that you wrote in collaboration with lyricist Scott Rutledge. Sleep, the Pollyanna Duo, Barely Breathing, Empty Province. So what suddenly inspired you that suddenly on that album you're writing all this stuff?
um, I mean, I always felt inspired, honestly. Um, and I don't think anything had changed. I think I just had gotten better at it and I had put more time into it. And as a result, I had more things to sort of offer into the mix. And when I, submitted the songs to the other folks, they wanted to include them. So I don't think there was anything that changed other than it was just part of that gradual process that I talked about before, where I was just doing more and more of it. So
Awesome. So quite a lot of lyrics for your compositions were written by Scott Rutledge. So how long
Mhm.
has he been writing lyrics for the band, and what drew you to work with him?
What was the first thing you said? How
How
what
long
now?
has he been writing lyrics for the band?
Wow, man, this is one of those things my brain is not really clear on. I know that like he had met Tim, um, I want to say delivering pizzas in quite a while back, and they would talk and ride around together and stuff, and talk for hours afterwards and whatnot about all sorts of things. And um, I know that basically during the American Dream, Scott was a huge part of that. And he had obviously written stuff before that, but that's when I think he really hit his stride. So he's been writing lyrics for us for, I mean, quite a while. There's stuff on Not a Food that he wrote lyrically, and so and he's all over the wild, and every record at some point since, for the most part. So, and what was I'm sorry, the second part? You asked how long, and
Just what drew you to marrying your two aesthetics together?
well, I from my point of view, I was grateful because I'm lyrics are the hardest thing for me to write. I don't create vocal melodies from words. I've tried that just as an experiment, and that's very hard for me. But in some ways, it's harder to actually create meaningful words that aren't clunky when they're sung. I mean, there's a lot to that. to a melody that I've written. And I can do it, and I've done it on some of the songs, but it's the kind of thing that takes me, and I'm not joking, like it could take me 6 months to do one song. I just have to keep going back, and it's like, oh, those last three words are just not working. And whereas Scott is incredibly prolific, but also like, I mean, I sent him my demos to do words to, and he'll get back to me in a day or two or three, and he's got these amazing words, and I'm just like, how do you do that? And I personally love I love his lyrics. So to me, it's been great.
Wow. Yeah, well, I'm with you. I definitely struggle with the lyric writing portion. Uh, so,
Yep, not my forte.
so most unusually, you guys have been doing a subscription service since 2013. So every month for all your subscribers, you deliver some old live footage, a strange wild card to listen to, and a new song of the month. And you've managed to keep doing that for a full decade now, releasing over 120, or I guess longer than a decade. You've released over 120 songs to your subscribers. And then in 2017, you began assembling some of these songs into albums for public release and to have that in physical form. So you've now released 5 albums in this vein, which represent just a fraction of the material you've created on a monthly basis in the past decade. So it started with Putting Off Death in 2017, and then Fades in 2018 was a really special record, I think, because that's the first record consisting entirely of your material, plus some lyric contributions by Scott.
Mhm.
So that's the first time the public got to hear 8 to 10 full songs of Jeff on one album, depending which version they bought. And a lot of these were among the earliest songs you released through your subscription service. So what was the impetus for doing that?
For doing
finally
the subscription service?
No, for putting together a record entirely of your material for the first time.
Oh, okay. Well, it sort of stems from what I was also talking about earlier, in that the more I wrote, you just get more prolific at it or whatever, and you're doing more of it. And so little by little, I was accumulating more and more songs. And at a certain point, because, I mean, we can only do so much as a band as far as getting physical releases put out. I started thinking, at least in my head, of how I was going to get some of this other stuff out there. I had accumulated by then probably 20 songs at that point I was using Logic on my hard drive to, as a compositional document tool. And so I had in my mind I was going to create a solo record, if you will, just to get some of these songs out there. And yeah, I didn't know what I was going to call it or anything, although Todd, our friend Todd Rittman, at the time, I think I shared one of my yet another childhood horror story. In this case, it was a high school yearbook. They managed to misspell my last name 3 different ways in 3 different photos that I was in. One was Libersher, which isn't too off. Then there was like a jazz band photo where I was Linderho, which isn't even close. And then there was one, I got this fitness award thing or something, and it was a Cibber show, Cibershow. And so Todd just sort of started referring to the solo material as Cibber show. And I probably wouldn't have named it that, but it was definitely funny. And Todd sort of got me started on how to use Logic and how to use an interface and things like that, more learning curve stuff. And I don't remember how this worked exactly, but I reached out to him and was like, hey, I want to do this thing. And he was very excited, and he'd heard the demos. And so I went in to his studio, and man, that dude, he has such an ear for music and guitar stuff. I mean, he's a ridiculous guitar player and a great person, but he he really pulled some things out of me that I would have never thought to do while we were making that record. It was a lot of fun. Um, he'd be like, "Oh, no, let's use this guitar with this amp on and this pickup, and let's do this." And I'd just be like, "Yeah." It was really a joy to make that record with him. And so who am I going to get to play drums? Of course, Tim. And so I had the usual sort of cast of characters. And I don't remember once again the details of this, or when this was in the process, but at some point we were listening to some of the takes, and I don't think it was completely done by then, but maybe it was. I don't remember. But we were at Todd's in the living room listening with Tim and myself, and at a certain point, Tim just looked at us. He's like, this is so not like a Cheer Accident record that I kind of want it to be a Cheer Accident record. So that's how it became not a Jeff solo record, but a Cheer Accident record. And he had no problem with it being, completely written by me or whatever. He just, the sound of it, I think is where he was coming from with that. So that's how that worked. That's how that ended up being something that I wrote everything on, because it originally was going to be a solo record, if you will.
Very cool. Then how did the title shift from Sibber Show to Fade?
Well, Sibber Show was going to be I think the name of the project, or so or maybe it was going to be the name of the record. I don't remember, but I think I came up with that title, and it, once again, foggy memory, but I know that there was some talk about, Tim had mentioned to me, I think that Todd, sort of one of his things he wasn't that into was like when songs just fade out, like it's kind of a cop out kind of thing. And I don't want to talk for him, but I think that's how that worked. And so like I just thought it'd be funny because most, if not, I don't remember, do they all fade out? I'd have to think about it a minute, but there's a lot of songs on that record that do fade. But just a side note, Tim's a big proponent of this too. Like when a song is fading, it doesn't mean that nothing can be happening during that. Like, there's really interesting things that can happen as a song fades out. But so I think that may have planted a seed. But then the more I thought about that title, it's like, oh, that implies so many different things. And that's, the more I thought about it, I was like, wow, I like that. And Tim liked it, and Scott liked it, and he had some ideas on what to do about the cover with that, what might work. And so that's kind of how that came to fruition.
Very cool. So you also ended up having a strong presence on the next record, Chicago 20.
Mhm.
I think of the 8 songs, there were only 3 that you didn't have a writing hand in. And that record passes itself off as the missing album in Chicago's discography, complete with the album cover imitating one of theirs. And I actually hadn't even realized that Chicago skipped the number 20 until you guys put that record out. So what's the story there? What inspired you to fill in that gap?
That was Tim's idea. It's just too perfect to not do that, right? So, and we also, both of us love that band, at least he probably likes more of the stuff that happened later than I do. And he's more familiar with some of that, but like, their first, whatever, 7 records or whatever it is, I think are incredible. And so we definitely love the band. And I don't know, I just think that was kind of a pretty great, perfect idea. So.
Yeah, it is great. It cracked me up. He actually encouraged me to listen later into their discography than I had, and I'm glad he did that.
Oh, good.
Yeah, you wrote the penultimate song on that record, "Things," with lyrics by Emily Morgan, who had been the band's keyboardist and singer at the time, and that is just a gorgeous, haunting song with really surreal lyrics. And we'll come back and listen to it at the end of this interview. But do you want to talk about that song at all?
Yeah, just similar process as far as how it came about writing wise. Just marrying things together, ideas, layering things. I had I think I may have had one line that Emily kept, like, because when I write melodies, I will, like in Logic or whatever, to demo, I sing, but it's real like stream of consciousness, phonics stuff that just is easy to sing. And sometimes Scott even does this. He'll take like a phrase of mine and he can build words around it and use it. And I think there may have been one part of a line or one thing that Emily kept. I have to verify that. But yeah, I mean, I gave it to her to do the words to, and they kind of blew me away. I think they're amazing. And I think they fit the vibe of that song. Um, and I yeah, I'm pretty happy with how that one turned out. I said there's a kind of a lot going on in the beginning section, and I like how there's not a lot going on in the sort of second half, but it still is pretty rocky and um, yeah, I'm happy with that one.
Yeah, it has a great arc to it. So I know the two latest Cheer Accident records were more Tim projects, but you did have a hand in a few songs on them. I believe you co-wrote two songs on Q Pop, and then the last song on that record, Polish Vasectomy, is a song that was based on a pizzicato violin riff and lyrics by my wife, Sophia Udine. And I guess I played piano on that one. I don't really remember what I did, but I'll trust the album credit. But you played prepared guitar on that song. So, how do you prepare a guitar exactly?
You stand over it and go, guitar, prepare. Um, no, it's yet another thing I think Chris taught me, alligator clips on the strings.
Cool.
And you get this weird metallic sort of thing, and it's never the same exactly each time you put the clips on the strings. You get like a different sort of frequency. It's fun.
I might have to give that a try.
You should, yeah. You've been missing out all these years, buddy.
I think I have.
Yep, that's where it's at.
On the latest Cheer Accident record, Vacate was a Tim and Phil idea from a long time ago that was meant to be kind of an easy listening record, but you co-wrote one song on the album, Prodigal. Can you tell us a little bit about that one?
Yeah, I don't remember exactly how or where we were, but I think I came up with the chord structure and I was sort of playing it for Tim or with Tim, and he recorded it, and then he did the like the vocal melody to that. So, and I had the extra guitar parts and all that layering, and then um, the final version, he played the idea of adding all that sort of like weird gurgly noise stuff that's going on in there. And when I first heard it, I was like, I kind of bristled. I was like, oh man, I don't think I like that. But we talked and he's like, yeah, maybe if I bring it down in certain, and it improved to me after he brought that down a bit in the mix. And I think there's certain aspects of it where it needed to be a little louder, and those things are still a little more present. So I think it ended up being pretty perfect. I think it's a little bit of the wrong and what's wrong with this picture on that record, but I may be saying that because it's just more guitar oriented compared to a lot of the piano stuff, and you know, and even the other guitar stuff is just kind of like way more vibey, laid back, like it had that Phil vibe to it. Um, and I can't put the like branch up the S German in the stuff I do, so it's just a little more, I don't know. I think it fits, but yeah, I think it probably fits more than I'm thinking it fits
I
in
think,
that record, which I think that it's a great record.
yeah, it is a really beautiful album, and I think that was your fifth album to be recorded with Steve Albini, right?
No, boy, I'm once again bad at numbers, but that sounds right. I can go one at a time from way back, but yeah, I think you're right.
So what
Yeah.
was working with him like?
Um, fuck. See, it's happening already. God damn it. Just give me a second. Um, I, it was amazing. Um, I, the most brilliant and easily the funniest human I've ever known in my life. Um, I could just sit here for 3 hours and tell stories. Um, I can maybe share a couple in the spirit of everything. Um, you know how his thing was he wasn't a producer, he was a knob twiddler, an engineer. I'm here to do a job for you, not to produce your record and tell you what to, you know. And I don't remember the specifics of what Tim was asking him to do. For the sake of the story, let's assume Tim wanted gated reverb on a snare drum, which I don't think he would have wanted at that point, but let's just go with that. And I remember him saying something like that. Hey, Steve, that one section, can we put some gated reverb on the snare drum? And this is classic Steve. Tim, there's nothing I'd like more than to put gated reverb on your snare drum in that one section. If you'd like me to help you completely ruin your record, I'm perfectly willing to do it. There were so many moments like that that were just like you were just on the floor laughing. He just had such a way of talking. He was so witty. And even in situations like that, he always had your back. Like that was one stand-up dude, and he always had your back. Um, um, so another story when we were doing introducing Lemon, which I think was a wonderful experience in there. I think that version of the band was really at a pretty special level when we did that record there. And there's a lot on that record going on. Um, so you know the record, right? You've
Mm-hmm.
probably heard Campo Physique. So um, so that came about during one of our jams, and you know, similar to the King Cheeseman thing, it was just me riffing on crazy childhood garbage, you know, and of sure enough, if you do something in the context of Pure Accident, it's going to end up either on a song or you're going to have to do it live. Like Alex was fake crying in a van one day, and Tim and I to this Fifth Dimension song, and Tim and I are like, oh, at the same time. And sure enough, that night, Alex was on a stool crying to start our set off while we played frisbee over his head or whatever. So, like, so you have to be careful. So in that particular jam, I started doing this thing to this crazy dumb Casio beat Dylan thing Dylan was doing, and Jamie was doing this boom bass line or whatever, and so yeah, it became a song. But when we were at Steve's, I had gotten out of the vocal booth doing my whatever that is, vocals. And Steve's just, you know, doing his stuff at the console, and we're all sitting behind him. And he just starts talking, and he's like, um, Jamie, and Tim, one of the things I like best about your singing voices and your singing vocals is how similar they are to your speaking voice. And then he just turns around and just stares at me like that. Because I just got done doing Campo Physique, and we all just like lost it. He didn't have to say anything. You could tell he was really like not having a good time, but yeah. Anyways, um, I mean, I could just sit and tell stories all day about how great it was to work with that guy. About, you know, if he cared about you, that dude would have taken a bullet for you. I'm not exaggerating. He was a special guy, and a lot of people are going to miss him. So I'm grateful I got to work with him the number of times I did. And yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I say this has been hard. I don't know. It just every time I think about him, it hits me. Of
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that.
course.
And I also got to meet him very briefly
Yeah.
thanks to you guys because I sat in on the vacate sessions and it was
Yep.
during the lockdown, so only people who were playing in a session were allowed in
Yep.
electrical audio. And um, you know, my wife Sophia was recording a bunch of stuff for the record, and Tim felt bad for me having to sit out in the car while she recorded, so he gave me just a single chord to play.
That one chord.
Steve, we need to bring this guy in to play the magical organ chord, which is on the song Postmarked. And so I got to be recorded by Steve Albini, just playing one chord ever.
Oh, trust me, he knew, but he loved us, so he would, yeah, he got it. So I think that was hilarious, and I'm so glad you got to at least meet him and experience him and see that studio, and you know just how special things are there. So yeah,
Yeah, I am too. And so
yeah,
thanks for making
definitely,
that happen. Appreciate it a lot.
yeah.
Um, So I guess we should probably start wrapping this thing up around this
Okay.
point. Um, I guess the last question I'll ask is I've heard you've been writing a lot of really cool songs for the subscription service lately, and including a few epics.
Epics.
So what do we
Awesome.
have in our future to look forward to here?
I'm not sure what specific tunes you probably mean, like the recent stuff, I think, from the site that were like mine. I want to say Sundown Ride is probably the most recent, that's a song I've had for a bit, and things move slowly sometimes, and I got Todd to record that. Tim did some of the recording too. He recorded Laura Botten, who absolutely killed the vocals. Scott had written those words, and um, she completely captured the vibe of what that song is about to me, and so did Scott with the words. I I think that one turned out better than I had hoped or expected, to be honest with you. I don't know if that'll end up on some physical thing at some point, maybe in 2045, right? And what was the other? I think, oh, the Blue Lie, that was probably fairly recent, if I remember right. And that's more of an epic. In fact, I think we determined when we were at Todd's recording it that that one broke the record for a number of tracks from a Jeff song, because Todd he was always like, Jeff, how many guitar tracks are on this? I'm like, oh, 31. It needs them all, So, but that dude always makes it work, like he's amazing. But it's a lot. We torment him with my songs sometimes, and that one was no exception. And once again, I'm pretty happy with how that one turned out. There's a lot going on there, and hopefully that will see the light of day in a physical release at some point. I think there's a lot to that one also, and it touches on a lot of different musical aspects. So
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that one is a real serious journey. Really cool track, and I think you need the 31 guitars to get that big
see, you're in my camp, buddy.
Yeah, because the arena rock influence is still in there,
Yeah, man, you want to be my agent? You get 10% of nothing. How's that?
Sounds good. Well, everyone, if you want to hear those songs, then go to cheeraccident.com and sign up for a subscription. It's only $2 a month to get a new song every month, plus some archival live footage and a random weird thing. It's definitely worth it. So go check that out. And yeah, thank you for everything, Jeff. Thank you so much for doing
buddy.
this.
I appreciate it. I really appreciate you doing this.
And thank you to everyone who showed up for this, and thanks again to Anthony for letting me do this through Make Weird Music. So
thanks to everyone.
Sorry?
I said, yeah, and I thank you, everyone who happened to listen to this, and yeah, what you said. Thanks.
Right on. Well, let's listen to Things from Chicago 20 to finish this off. And have a great night, everyone.
care.